Any members of the public who've joined us in the room today, do not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. And I think we've got 1.5 hours for this hearing. So I'm Deputy Catherine Curtis, the chair of the panel.
I'm Conotard Mark Labby, vice chair of the panel.
I'm Deputy Paul Ray and I'm a panel member.
I'm Deputy Helen Miles and I'm a panel member.
Deputy Mary Lahegerass, St Helier North, Minister for Justice and Home Affairs.
Kate Boyne, Chief Officer for Justice and Home Affairs.
Nathan Fox, Associate Director of Justice Policy.
Alison Fossey, Detective Superintendent, States Police.
Nikki Crook, Head of Digital Forensics Unit, States Police.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I'll start with the questions. So, Minister, you are responsible for the island's justice policy and criminal justice and community safety policy. In respect of legal protection for individuals, what is your assessment of the legal protections that children in Jersey currently have from online harm? So this isn't about what's in process, it's about what they have already.
Okay, currently Jersey does not have a specific offence that intimate image abuse or other forms of technology facilitated abuse. However, existing laws have generally been drafted in a way that so that they're fairly neutral and are therefore generally applicable. For example, deepfakes or AI-generated pictures are encompassed by existing provisions, and this was confirmed in the Jersey courts. For example, the judgment of the Royal Court AG versus Lay on the 17th of November 2023, where an AI-generated image resulted in a conviction. At present, Article 51 of the Telecoms Law 2002 is used to prosecute these forms of abuse in lieu of a more suitable framework that accounts for recent advances in technology since the legislation was introduced. Furthermore, since the Telecoms Law does not sit under the Sexual Offences Jersey Law 2018, so the anonymity does not automatically apply for victims, which can cause reluctance to report these instances to the police. Mm-hmm. The new legislation seeks to make up these gaps, so it would be capturing the intimate image abuse as well as cyber stalking under the Sexual Offences Law. This will further protect victims and survivors from these forms of abuse, whether children or adults, obviously. And the Protection of Children's Law 1994 also provides protection in relation to the taking of or making of indecent images of children and the possession and distribution of those images.
So you would say that what's currently there is the sort of existing neutral laws which can be used, but
yes.
You'd say that, would you say that's sufficient?
We have been getting convictions with them, but obviously it's like with everything. Legislation does need to keep being evolved. So I think even though we've had a conviction in 2023, I do think that we need to sort of maybe more make some minor changes in relation to some of the legislation so that things are a bit more explicit about what they are, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I know you've mentioned the new laws that were coming in anyway around cyber stalking and
yeah,
so
I mean,
on.
I don't know if Nathan's got anything further that he thinks is valuable to that question.
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the existing protections for online harms, I think it's worth noting as well, we have the grooming offence in the Sexual Offences Law, which, you know, is, I think, conceptually primarily going to start as an online activity. I don't know if I should talk about the new legislation plans and effects on children now, or whether that's going to come.
So it's coming up
later.
soon. So, so just on this subject of what there is at the moment, you're talking about improvements to existing legislation as well. So do you think that they're even with the current plans, should there be more legislation being looked at?
I think we've got a whole raft of different legislation that's coming forward. So I don't know if you've got anything specific you think that is necessary, because there's a whole raft of new legislation. I think, as I said, I mentioned AI because in the legislation it talks about, is it not pseudonym,
Pseudo images.
pseudo images.
Yeah.
But we have prosecuted AI under that umbrella. But I think what we need to always be aligned to is that as things evolve, we need to make sure that things are more explicit, because obviously those could potentially, those could change and the courts may change their views on certain things. I think we need to keep abreast of it all so that we keep moving forward, not just standing still.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, where do you think the most significant gaps or weaknesses in Jersey's current approach to safeguarding children online? Where does that sit? And I was just looking at, for example, what's now illegal in the UK but not in Jersey is platforms being required to introduce age verification for some types of content, things like that. So there's no plans to bring that into Jersey.
Well, those platforms, I believe, would sit under economic development, sustainable development.
Well, yes, we've been working with our colleagues in that department because the justice system as it operates in Jersey is sort of geographically linked to the island, and it covers primarily, and it operates at the speed of the justice system, which is not immediate. So the question of how you manage sort of global providers and their relationship with content isn't something really that you can do with a criminal justice system in a small jurisdiction. It's something that requires the sort of negotiation engagement that I think the economy department has been working on.
So maybe it would have been more practical if Jersey was part of the UK legislation. But anyway,
I think the only thing is, with being part of the UK legislation, that also has its challenges from the point of view of us actually being able to make changes. You get the package, you can't then try and change that package. So I think what we need is a fit for purpose for Jersey, but we need to get it in as quickly as possible, is what I would say.
okay, thank you. And I've got a specific example now. There was a Royal Court judgment in January this year relating to an individual who was charged with sexual offences against teenage girls. And it was reported that he had groomed his victims after meeting them online through Snapchat. So are there any learnings from this case that can be used to inform online safety and community safety policy?
And can I just interject there, Minister? I think there was also a case very recently in Guernsey as well.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, obviously this individual was convicted to 8 years in prison. So that was a successful prosecution. Obviously, I'm committed to continue to work on this within, across ministerial portfolios, because obviously this covers 4 different ministries. The cross-ministerial group, which the Sustainable Economic Development Minister mentioned in his hearing this or last week, will continue working and will consider carefully the scrutiny report resulting from these sessions and obviously the evidence that's been submitted in relation to that. And so officers across all of these different portfolios will obviously look at the legislation, be it as flexible and forward-thinking as we possibly can be, so that we can have wide provisions to be able to deal with that.
Okay, and do you think there's sufficient support as well available for victims of offences like this? And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a developing area because increasingly all crimes now have a digital element. So our victim care services need to be aware of that and how to support victims of these crimes who do suffer harm from online abuse. And that I would take that even as far as to our SARC, because they need to be available to support victims with practical and emotional support as well who are experiencing online abuse. And it's just about us all evolving that a crime, there's no differentiation now between a digital crime and a crime. They're all one now, and everyone has to, and this is a favourite phrase of Nikki here, improve their digital literacy right across the criminal justice system, from the detectives that are investigating through to the prosecutors, through to the judges. We all have to understand this world, the different apps, the different platforms, and it's complicated.
Yeah, so that is interesting, isn't it? So like the Sexual Assault Referral Centre then will have to probably have more work than ever before, and like you say, across
Yeah.
the board in this area.
I think fundamentally as well that what we need to ensure that we work on is actually encouraging and supporting young people in a way across the piece. Well, not only young people, everybody in relation to sort of this type of abuse and content online is that about education and supporting so that people have confidence to speak to others of their peers if it's happening to them. You know, the trusted youth worker, the trusted teacher at school, parents or guardians. And I think from our perspective, this is what we really need to try and encourage, because what we need is people to be reporting these offences, because of course quite often they're not reported to the police. So I think we need to be able to do all of that work to ensure that we've got an environment where people feel like if they're being targeted online, that they can actually report that, and they need to be, because the more that people report, the more it becomes in that public space, the better for all of us, I think.
Yeah, of course, and I suppose it's particularly difficult with children because they don't necessarily know that they're being targeted, do they? as
No,
well?
and that's why education is important.
Yeah. Okay, so now I just have a more general question. Minister, are you aware of the concept of digital safety by design in relation to online safety, and should the Government of Jersey incorporate this into policy making?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, obviously in 2024, the OECD published a report suggesting 8 key components for digital safety by design for children, and that is employing age assurance mechanisms, which I think we've already sort of touched on, implementing child-centred design, detecting and preventing harm, and digital service providers can proactively identify and mitigate risks by implementing technical safety measures, such as the advanced detection systems, default settings, content filters, etc. Protecting children's privacy and personal data, alongside ensuring that child-friendly information provisions and facilitating complaints and redress. So I think, as I said, I think it's quite important when we look at all of this, is about the education and support of young people, encouraging child participation and putting children at the centre of any decision making. So I think that is where these types of things are very important.
Okay, so would you say that's already incorporated then into any of the offences work that you're already under?
I would suggest that it is.
I think broadly speaking, between departments,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's you.
Okay, thank you. It was just some questions around the Violence Against Women and Girls report, and in particular the recommendations. Recommendation 11 was around reviewing and strengthening the current legal framework to better protect islanders, talking about cyber flashing, the use of deep fakes. They also talked about the problem of the evidential burden of motivation thresholds. I think that was for the voyeurism offence in particular. So can you just tell us when you'll be bringing forward the amendments to the Sexual Offences Law in line with the 4 recommendations?
Right. I think I will ask Nathan from the point of view of the actual timescales, but as far as I'm aware, but Nathan will be able to verify this or not, all of those recommendations for all of those legislative changes should be on target for the end of this year at different spaces through the time. So I don't know whether you've actually got the...
That's the intention, and that's the target that we've given. There is some variability in the sort of week-to-week delivery time of this stuff, because when you move into it, the drafting process raises more questions. The intimate image abuse piece is progressing first. We're now on draft 2 or 3 of that. The general intention, as you say, there's been issues in the past with the motivation threshold around voyeurism and image gathering, taking photos, peeping at people, because the requirement is that it be for sexual gratification. So as you move into a space where images might be taken and shared for the purpose of humiliating somebody or because somebody thinks it's funny, you start to find that motivation threshold is a barrier to dealing with harms that are happening. So the intention is to remove that and to broaden the concept of the voyeurism into what we're calling intimate image abuse offences. So the non-consensual taking or sharing of intimate images of a person, broadly speaking, would become potentially a criminal offence, as would threats to share that material, as would the unsolicited transmission of sexual imagery. And we're talking at the moment about whether that is sexual imagery or intimate imagery or what. But effectively, it means cyber flashing.
Yeah.
Although the phraseology has got to be worked out precisely. So cyber flashing will be a crime, and there'll be no motivation threshold on that.
And will
So
there be a definition of cyber flashing in that particular legislation?
it would be something very much like the unsolicited transmission of sexual imagery. And that would be, again, without a motivation threshold. So it wouldn't matter whether you're doing it for sexual gratification or to upset somebody, or because you thought it was funny, it would still become a criminal offence
Okay, thank you.
to do it.
Can you provide us with an update on the cyber stalking legislation?
So the stalking piece, equally being worked on, we met the drafter about that yesterday. Sort of pre-meet to say these instructions are going to work for you. So that hasn't started drafting yet. It's patterned, broadly speaking, on the way the UK does stalking, which is to say you have harassment, and then within that activity there is stalking. And then within that there's an aggravated offence which deals with having caused, I think it's serious harm or distress or similar. That's a more complicated piece. It's intended to be seamless between physical and online activity. And both the intimate image piece and the stalking piece do affect children, because, for instance, in stalking, there'll be no minimum age at which you can be stalked or harassed. So it could be applied to somebody engaging with a child if the sexual offences law wasn't appropriate, or it could be applied to somebody sort of in a school environment, with all of the usual protections around the way we treat the criminalisation of children would come along with that, but it would be applicable for the benefit of children.
Okay, thank you. The Vaughan report also recommended that the government should ensure that similar protections to those afforded by the online safety bill were brought in to ensure that islanders benefited from all the protections when using online platforms. I think, Minister, you've already alluded to the fact that you don't agree that we should have had the permissive extent clause into the online safety bill.
I didn't say I agreed with that. What I said was that it's difficult to take something as its whole when you can't make changes in relation to... Obviously, I wasn't part of those discussions. However, so I don't actually necessarily, I'm aware of what Deputy Morale's view is, but what always worries me a little bit about taking PECs from the UK is not being able to manage them for Jersey. And so from my perspective, what I would like to see is actually something fit for purpose for us. But however, we need to be able to have that clout in relation to the platforms. But I'm not totally convinced that the UK have got them either. And of course, both Guernsey and the Isle of Man actually did take the PEC and have done nothing with it. So I think, for me, it is about always trying to get something that is actually fit for purpose for us. And I wouldn't want to take legislation that I can't actually adapt to my own, I don't mean my own personal terms, but I actually feel that can be actually managed by us.
I mean, we've got examples where permissive extent clauses worked extremely well for safeguarding vulnerable adults, for example, safeguarding vulnerable children. That PEC has been extended so that we can operate the DBS system. But some of the challenges that you've already talked about, the fact that we have no influence over the online platforms, I can understand the rationale for doing it locally, but there has got to be quite a number of challenges there.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
You've talked about a couple, so I mean, it kind of feels that we're left in some sort of limbo here, that we can't take the benefits of what might have been in that permissive extent clause because we actually don't have the choice to do that now, and that's gone. But also, given the legislative framework here that we've got, that actually we might not be able to act at the right time. I mean, how long do you think it will take to get similar measures that are provided in the online safety
I don't
bill
actually
into
know
Jersey
exactly
legislation?
where, I don't know if Nathan knows exactly where the economic department is with the legislation in relation to the rest of it.
I don't believe that now they may have a timeline, but I don't believe that we've discussed it with them recently. I know they're looking at the Online Safety Act in the UK and the Digital Services Act, the EU legislation, and they're working with the Jersey Office of the Information Commissioner to try and sort of establish a reporting and takedown line. That's what they relayed to us, but it is something that they're primarily working.
But I think we can safely say that it won't be within this political term.
Well, I mean, they have the the timeline. If they've relayed that to you, then that's the case. I don't have any more information.
Well, I was just going to say, we've heard about the cross-ministerial group, so is this not all worked out between what's happening in the different departments?
Well, no, but we don't necessarily all know exactly what timelines each department has in relation to their legislation and what changes are coming forward. So I think the thing is that obviously, you know, that minister will know the timelines and whether that will or won't be within this timescale of this government. That isn't something at this stage that
Who chairs that cross-ministerial group?
we haven't actually got a chair at the moment. We've had a couple of discussions about it, but we haven't actually got a chair. But
Okay.
yeah,
So would it be fair to say that there isn't proper cross-ministerial work going on at the moment?
well, I think there is at an officer level. There is clearly work going on within those bounds, and we've had discussions about it. But I think the thing is that everybody is working forward on their own legislative changes in relation to the online platforms and violence against women and girls. And the Sustainable Economic Development Minister will be dealing with his department and what legislation is a priority for him.
Yes, we meet the economy guys every 2 weeks to sort of go through where we are with the joined up working. They've seen all of our drafting instructions as they go. They've had some really useful input on it. It's just I don't recall from our last conversation with them the timeline they mentioned for their intended work on this. I mean,
Do you think that could be improved, the work between the different departments, the cross-ministerial work? Do you think that could be improved?
I think as I said, the people, the policy officers are all clearly working together, bearing in mind that this is just one part of an element of, recommendations. As an example, for violence against women and girls, there's 77 of them across all departments, health, education, and there is some that sit with economic development as well. And so, of course, we're all sort of working to get our delivery done and sort of dealing with each other along the way. But obviously I'm not a fay necessarily with all of the timelines for for 12 other ministerial positions.
Can I just come in briefly? So there's also a proposal for a cross-departmental officers group to support the ministerial group, which I think will really help. But I think the ministerial group's met a couple of times and needs to continue meeting, as the minister said. I do think that arrangement can be strengthened, and I think certainly the recommendations you make will no doubt go to that and help us with that. I think putting an officer structure in place, and it would be slightly wider as well than the ministers are already involved. So public health, for example, are very interested in this, and there's obviously real concerns and impact there, and you'll have been exploring that with other witnesses, I'm sure. So I think picking up that better officer coordination so that we can better support a cross-ministerial approach to it is absolutely something we'll be taking forward, and no doubt you'll potentially make recommendations on that we'll welcome.
Okay. Helen Lee, okay, I think that's you.
Okay.
Just to carry on that vein, can you please, Minister, describe how the work will make Jersey legislation comparable with other jurisdictions?
Obviously, it isn't only sort of England and Wales that the team are looking at. Officers have taken particular interest in the approaches that obviously other jurisdictions are taking. So there's obviously the Online Safety Act of 2023, which obviously gave a broad sort of different amount of legislation and what could be looked at in relation to that. The Criminal Justice Bill also seeks to insert a new offence of taking intimate without consent into the Sexual Offences Act 2003. And the previous UK government also announced an intention that the creation of sexually explicit deepfakes would be captured within their legislation. And obviously, we've talked already about voyeurism, and that was in their plans were to repeal those as well. I mean, obviously, we've also looked at Australia, a range of legislation across New South Wales, and Victoria makes it an offence to record or distribute an intimate image without consent. And of course, in November of last year, there was a lot that was talked about by the then Prime Minister about protecting children online. Also, Australia introduced a civil justice approach to the non-consensual distribution of intimate images through the Online Safety Act in 2021. And then about, sort of notices and failure to comply offences. British Columbia, the Intimate Image Protection Act 2023. So there's lots of different places, and that's why sometimes it's actually quite beneficial to us to actually create our own legislation so that we can pick the best of all of the other places as well. Accepting that sometimes you just need to get on with it though, as opposed to delaying it. But I do sometimes think that it's quite beneficial to us to be able to create things that are more localised to us. I don't know whether Nathan's got anything further that he wants to add in relation to that.
Well, I mean, just to give an example, in terms of the stalking piece, there distinguishing harassment from stalking has proved to be an issue for a number of jurisdictions who've looked at it. I suspect the UK are entering another review phase of their stalking legislation, possibly to sort of start thinking about issues like that. But there's a very good example in Western Australia where they use surveillance as one of the distinctive sort of separation pieces between being stalked and being harassed. And that's extremely instructive, and we're working with that at the moment to see if we can make it applicable locally. So yeah, we do look at all Commonwealth and other jurisdictions as well as the UK. But the intention is to align as far as possible. I mean, not least because with the resources available to a small jurisdiction, you have to take stuff from other people just in order to make it work. Novelty tends to be an inefficient way of working. So yes, comparability and standardisation is really something that we'll keep an eye on.
I mean, it's good to hear that you are looking at many different jurisdictions to find what are the best bits to introduce the legislation to Jersey. Is any part of the best bits you feel that you're not going to include in Jersey legislation? And if there are any particular parts, would you want to share it with us?
No, I don't think, to be honest, I'm that deep dived into what we would or wouldn't incorporate at this stage, because obviously it's officers that have been working on all of this, and obviously once the sort of process is complete and it's looking to go to drafting, then obviously I'll be shown, and we'll have a discussion about what's if there's any gaps that I think, or maybe the head of States of Jersey Police or somebody like Alison would have a look at as well, so that, it's a sort of, they're doing the policy work at the moment, but anything that's going to sort of go forward to the drafters, and when it's been drafted, then we'll obviously look at to ensure that there's no gaps within any of that.
Okay,
think
thank you.
that's pretty
So
covers
work is a bit in progress in
Yes,
terms of
yeah.
what you're going to adopt for Jersey,
Yeah.
and the reasons why
We'll-
you will
we'll-
be picking that.
From my perspective, we want to make it as comprehensive as we possibly can
Okay.
to ensure that there are no gaps. Because the one thing we don't want is gaps where people can actually evade being prosecuted for certain offences.
Okay. So do you think, Minister, that you are confident that the government of Jersey will keep pace with the rate of change and will be able to keep up with other jurisdictions and with the new update of technology by implementing our own legislation? Are you confident?
I think I'm confident that we can, but I'm also of a mind that we need to ensure that we don't leave legislation behind the curve, because I think we need to, as opposed to the continually rewriting of big pieces of legislation, we actually need to update them more often and more regularly. As an example, we found gaps in the 2022 or whatever years, which prevented us, as an example, with the Istanbul Convention. So I think we need to just make sure that, as an example, through our discussions, we've identified that there's a gap in the legislation that Alison was talking to me about, which looks at somebody under the age of 16, which means that the person under 18 is, and you might be able to, you can explain it better
The
than...
94 legislation for indecent images is only applicable to children and young people under 16, whereas everywhere else is 18, and the consequence of that, not only from a safeguarding point of view, of your older children, is the impact on Nikki's digital forensics team, because we cannot use software that they use elsewhere, which automatically scans the images and will pick out the ones under 18. So we have to individually look at all these images, which is not only time consuming, but from an officer wellbeing point of view is less than ideal. So I don't know the reason why in 1994 it was 16. There will have been a good reason for that. But in this day and age, every other piece of legislation would identify a young person as under 18. And it has that impact in the workplace,
So-
for us.
Yeah, so we've actually committed that we will change that legislation so that it actually falls in line with what is going to make it a lot easier for them to be able to deal with.
I was just thinking, Deputy Porre, sorry to interrupt that.
okay.
That just shows really how important it is that any legislation to do with online safety takes into account what's happening in other jurisdictions as well. It's all very connected, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an online tech expert, and maybe you, Nikki, could probably be more aligned with this. Is that how regularly should your legislation actually be reviewed to actually ensure that that keeps going forward? And I'm not necessarily saying every year or every 6 months or whatever, but it's almost like a rolling programme, so that if something changes, and this is probably where we need to get better at this, is that if something changes, that Nikki can come forward to the minister or the head of the department and say, this has moved forward, this is what the change we need to do, and almost a continual rolling programme of the changes of your legislation, so that you wouldn't be in a position where you have to have a total overhaul of, we've still got laws that go back to 1956, so that I can think of the top of my head, your road traffics, your licensing, all of these legislations are all well outdated, and we wait until years beyond, whereas minor changes along the way exactly is what it is, minor changes to keep it moving forward, so it's never out of date.
I mean, we would say that's essential because technology itself is evolving at the speed that even young people can't keep up. So whatever legislations you're going to bring on have got to be constantly trying to keep update. And, online harm is across countries. It's not a Jersey thing. We can be abused by people in so many different countries outside Jersey jurisdiction. So that is really important to bear it in mind. Thank you. So, Minister, out of all the sets of questions we asked you with regards to digital offences, are there any aspects of those offences and the work being done that you would like to talk about or share with us? There are questions we may not have asked of the participation.
Not at the top of my head, no.
Okay. Thank you. I think.
Yes,
Is
indeed.
you,
I mean,
Mark?
I'd like to ask Nikki, that we said it'd be great to have your opinion. Maybe, in my lifetime, and we've all had massive changes throughout my lifetime. My first computer took about 3 days to boot up, but nowadays everything's coming through on a device that size.
Yeah.
So what is your opinion about the legislation, and how often, AI is supposed to be a force for good, but we all know it's not going to be.
No.
So what is your opinion about how we keep up with this?
As in terms of timelines, technology advances so quick. I couldn't say every 6 months, every year, because something will come tomorrow that will then need that instant change.
Yeah.
But AI will be the challenge, and AI generated images, and not just the actual images themselves, but the models that are then used to create them. And I'm not sure where that would be covered at the moment in Jersey law, but it's the ownership of those models to actually create them, not just the actual images themselves.
Even though we have had prosecutions, it's like everything else. You need to keep moving your legislation forward to it so that you close those gaps when they come behind you.
Yeah, the pseudo images at the moment are good at capturing the kind of cartoon-like images, but when you get into the real AI, which is so difficult to distinguish from a real, so realistic, then the legislation needs to be able to account for that, and the need to not have to prove that's a deep fake and that's a real, because you'll soon not be able to tell any difference between the two. So, the legislation needs to keep up with that. And I guess if it's able to be drafted as broadly and as catch-all as possible is probably the best way to stop having
Keep
to
it less
keep
defined
changing.
and let it.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how that's possible.
Well, that's entirely true. And part of the art, we're coming to suspect, is not to chase tech. Simply state your harms, make it abundantly clear. So, for instance, the stalking piece. To be neutral about whether or not it's happening in the street or online. So if you arrange it right, you can be stalked in person, you can be stalked by telephone, you can be stalked over the internet, you should be able to be stalked by brain implant. The harm is concentrated on. If the legislation is neutral about the tech, it should last. It should have a long enough lifespan that it will capture stuff as you go forward. It's where novel things emerge. It's where technology takes you to a place where new types of things are happening. That's when the law, I find, tends to be left behind on this stuff.
Good answer, thank you. Minister, in your letter to the panel on the 10th of March, you highlighted the work that was underway in relation to the child sexual abuse and exploitation strategy, and that a recurring theme had been identified of growing complexity of online harms faced by children and young people at school, at home, and within the wider community. Please could you tell us more about this complexity that has been identified and describe the challenges that it poses?
We've obviously, in relation to the exploitation piece, it sits with the Safeguarding Partnership Board, which is obviously a multi-agency strategy which aims to reduce the child sexual abuse and exploitation and create a safer environment for children and young people in Jersey. A key objective of the strategy, which prioritises prevention and identification, is to raise public awareness of it. There continues to be ministerial support for the campaign and raising awareness in this particular area. The first phase of the plan focused on raising professional awareness through a conference which was delivered in November 2024, which the Minister for Children and Families attended. I unfortunately was unable to. Subsequently, groups were formed to develop ideas and strategies to drive the campaign plans forward, including a multi-agency steering group. The campaign isn't technology or app focused to restrict or control children's behaviours in the online world. Instead, it's sort of focusing on the educating and empowering adults to understand digital risks and feel confident in discussing them with children. And that's obviously something that I've already said previously in this hearing is about actually trying to ensure that there is an ability for young people to be able to bring forward any concerns that they have to adults in a way that they can. By fostering sort of the open conversations, and children are more likely to share their online experiences, ensuring that they can seek help and support timely along the way. Obviously, the Safeguarding Partnership Board, who actually met yesterday. No, that was the Corporate Parenting Board. Got my two boards muddled up then. Yes, yeah. So, obviously they meet quarterly, and that will be something that will be ongoing. And of course, I'm also part of the Corporate Parenting Board, which met yesterday. So, all of those different sort of lines, we're all sort of working together, and that includes health, myself, Children's Minister, and education and lifelong learning.
In fact, my next question actually relates directly to the Safeguarding Partnership Board. I believe they had a conference recently, a joint conference with the NSPCC on the topic of safeguarding children in the digital world. Can you tell us about the information and learnings you and your department got from that conference, please?
Yeah, unfortunately, as I said, I was unable to attend that particular conference because I was actually out of the island. The Children's Minister did. But in relation to the sort of safeguarding, education and awareness, because I think that is critically one of the biggest things. In schools, establishing a standard of online safety in the curriculum, integrating personal social health in the PSHE, and introducing early intervention strategies for parents and carers, providing accessible workshops and resources to help families understand and mitigate online dangers, because I think that's, as you've already alluded yourself, we are of an age that we don't necessarily understand all of these forums. So I think this isn't only about the protection or helping children to understand all of this, it's about having parents understanding it as well. From a community perspective, launching public awareness campaigns to encourage open conversations and collective action against online harm, which I think is sort of pretty much in the space, and we'll have seen lots of things in relation to a trial in a school over the last couple of days. As I said, so support systems for parents, strengthening trauma-informed services and creating clearer support pathways. And I think Alison's already talked about some of that. Equipping teachers, youth workers, social workers and agencies with tools for effective intervention, because that's also very important as well. And through collaboration in enhancing multi-agency frameworks to ensure shared accountability and streamlining those support services. So ensuring that we're sort of, from a legislative point of view, obviously we need to, strengthen our frameworks in relation to get it as much in line as we can with the UK Online Safety Bill, as we've already discussed. And the tech sort of introducing stricter regulations for tech companies, but as we've already said, that can be quite challenging, and I think it can be challenging even for jurisdictions a lot larger than ours. The consistence of training. So I think it's a bit like the legislative changes. As organisations, schools, agencies, safeguarding procedures, all of those sorts of things, it's almost like it's never off the table. And so you need to keep changing and updating and make sure that your policies and procedures keep moving forward and that you continue to train. Because, as a prime example, if you have somebody with a specialism, they have to have updated training every year or every 6 months. And this is what we need to be doing with this kind of training and technology, is to keep those, and so when budgets are tight, don't cut the training, because that's what we have done a lot in the past. The budgets get tight, we cut training. But what we do by doing that is actually then making our ability to actually deal with things weaker. So we must ensure that we do not cut budgets in relation to training to ensure that everybody is of a level so that they understand what they need to do to help others.
Can I just say, are you concerned at the moment about training, budgets affecting training opportunities? Is that an issue right now?
From my perspective, it's not something that sort of I can discuss in relation to across the piece. But what I'm saying is that certainly, I can give examples from the police as a basic officer safety programme. It's something that everybody has to do every year. And so, from the point of view of whether it's in health or whether it's in education or in other environments where it's necessary for people to be trained and being able to keep up to speed with this type of thing, it's essential that doesn't fall or lag behind. And the other thing is that in relation to the violence against women and girls, a lot of the recommendations talk about training and talking about training people in specific areas. And of course, those elements of it have been distributed to others. So the accountability for some of the delivery of the violence against women and girls sits with other departments. And some of those things are about training and development, ensuring that our staff are up to speed.
So you think it's okay? It's going.
I think it's okay, but it's something that, as I said, it's not something I would like to see that departments end up cutting.
Thank you, Minister. Talking about frameworks, and you've already mentioned the word a couple of times, can you tell us about how the Building a Safer Community framework will coordinate any future policy work relating to the protection of children from online harms? Do you feel that framework has a position to play?
I mean, the framework was introduced to provide a framework for the government and a wider community to enable a whole system approach to community safety. This is community safety. So this includes providing a framework to understand, future policies and strategies may be required. So as an example of all of that, under the umbrella of building a safer community is that the interaction within schools. And of course, that programme included schools dealing with online as part of one of the things they dealt. Obviously, the police, fire, immigration, ambulance all provide some inputs in those things, but as do inputs come from the in relation to online safety. So over the past year, the JHA Chief Officer and the Justice and BASC Coordinator have worked to establish BASC across the government as a coordinated function, and I think Kate's probably better at sort of actually explaining all of what's been going on in relation to that sort of sphere, if you like.
So the key thing at the moment is having established the framework, working out how it dovetails with the safeguarding arrangements, which are changing away from a formal safeguarding partnership board into the new arrangements envisaged in the Children and Families Law. And so the Justice and BAS coordinator has been working with the safeguarding business team on how we get that to work. There's some overlap, but there's also some significant difference in the concepts of community safety and safeguarding. And what we're aiming to do, particularly given the focus on online harms, is take forward the work that led to the conference and the questions you've already asked and the Minister's answered, and see, well, how does that fit in the future in the wider, as the Minister says, online safety definitely fits within community safety. Now, there's no hard edges in a way around the BAS framework. It could be very, very broad and involved in lots of things, but we also have to be realistic about what we can actually focus a limited amount of resource on. There's very limited resource in the centre of coordinating that function, but really that's okay in some ways because it's about functions that already exist heading in the same direction, having more strategic principles. Like you can see, we've got the coloured framework printed in front of us, and we're about to launch some new we call it collateral, the sort of documents around the BAS framework, including the child-friendly version and a video of it, which will really help because actually we tend to find we then end up relying on the children's version because it's by far the easiest way to explain it, and the main framework tends to get left a bit. So that will really capture that broad community nature of the work, and a lot of that collateral features visibly police officers and teachers and those that children would find in their space, helping them be safe. And so for me, that's got an absolute link to the online safety, but we are just building really what it looks like from a framework and governance point of view. Now, really, it's about what we can do and how we can do it, but you do need some structure around it. So I'd say it's work in progress. BASC absolutely has a place here as a sort of umbrella, and actually we want people pulling together and all heading in the same direction and not duplicating. So they're the sort of key principles of the work that's underway at the moment. Hopefully that helps to
I mean, the panel's great.
contextualise it.
It'll have a role to play. And it's
Absolutely,
very
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
So I have some questions now about other online harms, and so first one is about self-harm and suicide content. So how should we address risks of children accessing or sharing self-harm and suicide-related content online?
In relation to this sort of the self-harm and suicide rate online, there's no specific provision in relation to this currently proposed. Proposed legislation will be wide enough to address all such concerns, because obviously if we're addressing online safety and we are asking people to take material down, then this would be no different to that, I would suggest. I don't know whether Nathan has anything further to contribute in relation to that, but I think for me there's nothing specific about self-harm and suicide-related content online, but I would assume that the things that we put in place in relation to other offences could be dealt with in relation to these as well.
Yes, is that, do you think that self-harm content could be made to be taken down?
Well, so the UK Online Safety Bill, sorry, the UK Online Safety Act really did struggle with some concepts around this, I think, during its introduction. It had a category of material, as I understand it anyway, that was legal but harmful, which is to say stuff that didn't necessarily represent a criminal offence through it being out there, but it was obviously no good for everybody. And as I recall, that didn't actually make it to the final version of the bill. It's not something that we've concentrated resources on to date, simply because it doesn't form a recommendation of the VOG task force, which is primarily where we're going. And all the online harm stuff we're doing ultimately comes from meeting those recommendations. So you can see a space for addressing online harmful material, but I'm not sure where we would look for an exemplar of a country that's actually managed to deal with it effectively.
So it looks like there won't be any way to address this issue. Nothing's planned, nothing being considered.
Well, as I said, the UK, it's, yeah.
How detectable is it, Minister? I mean, this is, I always think about, the filters and things like that. How could you possibly, unless you rely on people reporting such incidents, how detectable is this sort of thing openly.
I mean, it is about reporting and then going to the Internet Watch Foundation, asking them to take down content as well. It's back to this whole education piece, and particularly young people being able to speak to adults about what they're experiencing online. I know other jurisdictions have had successful prosecutions where a young person has ultimately committed suicide, usually as a result of being blackmailed about images or something. Scotland, for example, has had a couple of successes there. But it's a difficult area for law enforcement. That,
Especially with the way the digital world works with VPNs and pinging off every
Yes.
single antenna on planet Earth.
And
But I mean,
dark
it's very highly undetectable then, is your reply.
yeah.
So in the absence of any legislation, do you think that Internet Watch does take down or would take down images of suicide-related content and so on?
They're quite responsive.
Yeah.
The Internet Watch Foundation has been our experience, and that's generally where we always refer people to if there's no actual criminality, as in because we don't have a crime to deal with it.
Yes.
And
Legal
they are
but harmful.
quite, yeah.
That is for people to report it, although because it's difficult when children are seeing it, they may not know
Yeah.
what to do and so on. Yeah.
And that's back to being able to talk about it. And it's we were talking the other day, this is well, it's not in this context, but the stranger danger chat from the 1970s that
Yes.
you need to be having today with children and young people.
Yeah, because of course the stranger danger chat before was actually physicality, whereas now the stranger danger is the iPad, the
Yeah.
phone, and actually that danger is probably worse because that person's not seen necessarily, whereas if in an open space, in a stranger danger the person's seen.
They could be representing themselves
Yes.
completely differently, couldn't
Yes.
they?
Anywhere in
So,
No escaping it because it's all online. It's in your bedroom.
Yeah.
You can't get away from it.
yeah, that's much worse then. So just to ask about fraud now. So to our understanding, fraud is a customary offence in Jersey rather than a criminal offence. As part of the digital offences work, is there any intention for the government to consider introducing a criminal offence for online scams or fraud in future? Because I know it's quite a big problem, isn't it, the online scams and fraud?
Yeah, it's more Chris Beachy, isn't it? But
It is. I mean, we can use the fraud to prosecute for online frauds. At the moment, it's generally, it's back to the scams. Where are they originating from? If you've got a local offender, yes, we will use, existing legislation to deal with that, because it's like we were talking at the start, these offences are adaptable to online, offline. But yeah, Chris Beachy, he works with the Fraud Prevention Forum. He's been a
Financial
member
services.
of that, financial services. And again, they're very much about education, prevention, putting out the messages about the latest scams that are happening. Because, I mean, the reality of this for law enforcement is it's such a big challenge, this area, because of the volumes of material that can be generated by devices. I mean, you held up your phone there earlier. So some of these now are 1 terabyte, and 1 terabyte is, and I got this from our experts, 1,300 filing cabinets worth of printed text. So that's one phone. We arrest people with multiple phones, and for disclosure purposes, we have to go through all that material, because all of that has to be disclosed into any criminal proceedings. So you can imagine the resource intensiveness of all of these offences and all of the offences that we're going to start introducing. So it's an area that needs, the government has to think about investment.
It's huge,
Investment
isn't
for
it? Yeah.
capacity, capability.
Can I
Right,
ask a
across the board.
supplementary,
Okay.
Alison? I said already in this meeting that AI we thought was going to be a voice of positivity going forward into the future. I wonder if AI could help you with such matters.
Yeah, and it will.
Yeah.
It will do.
Yeah, there are AI tools that the UK already use, and if our law is aligned into the same age range, that we've got 18, then there are tools that are there then that we can use, subject to testing and verification, to then bring in to help support with some of that work.
There's one positive use for it. Good.
Because in relation to the fraud, the work ongoing is about all islanders, even though it's probably not that many children in relation to fraud.
That was going to be part of my next question, because I remember in one of the recent reports, children had experienced quite a lot of online scams and so on as well. So do you think children experience this differently to adults, and what are the risks of scams targeted at children?
I think young people can be a bit more susceptible to scams, as well as the other age of the spectrum's older people. And I think that's because they live so much of their life online and on phones, and I think they're an easy target, and they work so fast on phones, don't they? They'll swipe, they'll click, and before they know it, they can have been scammed. That's just my impression. We don't see many reported at all. I asked for some figures before I came here today, and we had 72 reports of online crimes that involved young people, but most of those were to do with exploitation, grooming. I don't actually think there was one to do with fraud or online scamming, but I would think they are susceptible.
It's probably more so because they haven't quite formed their opinion or their realisation of what's real and what's not, to understand that judgment when something's put up on the phone, it's believed to be true and they just get on with it. They haven't formed their life opinions yet.
They don't have that experience, do
No.
they? So you said about 72 reports. Is that what time period is that?
That was last year, and that was a 90% increase on the previous year, which was something like 95% increase. I think young people are becoming more aware that some of these online activities are offences, and they are starting to report, and we want to encourage that, because then it's, we get a better idea of what's actually happening out there in the community. So yeah, it's good we're getting more reports, but I think it's still underreported without a doubt.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just a question now about misinformation. So are there any plans to update legislation that relates to the spread of misinformation or disinformation in online or digital spaces?
There's not anything that's currently features in relation to legislative on my agenda. I know that the Sustainable Economic Development Minister mentioned or outlined in his hearing that it would be challenging to define these concepts. I note with interest as well, obviously there was a report in relation to the riots last summer, and there's been sort of relevant convictions in relation to that. I haven't actually read that report at this particular stage. It's one for me to do, but obviously that's the thing, isn't it? It's actually being able to define those terminologies, really.
Okay, so even if there wasn't legislation around that, presumably has to be kept an eye on in case it's going to cause trouble. So can you confirm whether the States of Jersey Police have resources and technology to monitor misinformation online?
I wouldn't say we're certainly not resourced to monitor misinformation online. Technology-wise, yes, in terms of open source, we can monitor it, and we use open source for all sorts of purposes, from vetting to criminal investigations. So we could, but we are currently not resourced to do that at all.
And I suppose the point is that if somebody said there was misinformation, then you can actually then look at it.
Yeah, if
So-
someone reported it.
Yeah, it's about
Yeah.
the ability, if somebody reported it, then they've got an ability to look at it, but it's the actual, they wouldn't be looking at it without having something to look at, does that make sense? So you know, if somebody reports they think that there was misinformation or disinformation, then I suppose there's an opportunity for the State of Jersey Police to look at it, but they haven't got the resources to be doing that as a matter of course, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I'm just thinking of it in terms of, you know, whether it would spread, like we heard in the UK, to cause trouble, to cause crimes to happen.
Riots.
But that wouldn't be normally monitored.
If we had intelligence and that was happening, then of course we would set up and start monitoring it from our force intelligence unit.
Okay, thanks. That's you,
Thank
Helen.
you. My areas of questions were around sort of challenges of enforcement. I talked a little bit about that already. I think it's clear it's Department of Economy that are going to be responsible for the enforcement aspect of the data protection offences. Do Justice and Home Affairs and States of Jersey Police have any involvement at all in the investigation and prosecution of data protection offences?
Yes, yeah, we our CID regularly investigate and put cases to the Law Officers Department for data protection.
And you
offences.
envisage that will continue? Okay, thank you. You've talked about a few of the challenges of enforcement.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you wanted to raise?
I suppose, I mean, we talked earlier about the case that had been on trial earlier this year and the individual was convicted, but, you know, just to give, I suppose, a flavour of the challenges that we face. I mean, in 1 week alone, he had contacted 382 girls online.
382?
Yeah, and chatted to over 100 of them. You know, this was through Snapchat. And that individual had numerous devices, numerous aliases, and so you can only begin to imagine some of the challenges in investigating those types of cases and bringing them to prosecution.
Okay, thank you.
And we'll see how that case in Guernsey unfolds as well. That'll be very interesting for all.
And I think the other thing that we've also mentioned is about the internet being kind of cross-border, and how are we ensuring that our rules are effective in dealing with that when the content is hosted overseas?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. The crimes, any victim that came forward to report a crime that had happened, no matter where it happened in the world, we would take that crime report here. We would initiate an investigation and support that victim who was local here at a point in time where you'd identified that actually the suspect or the offender was overseas. That's when things become really quite difficult for us. It's not impossible. Certainly with the UK, who we've got closer relationships, we can travel, arrest, and bring back to Jersey offenders. It gets more difficult when offenders are like in the Philippines or some of these other far-flung places. So I think the victim support element is key here, and making sure they get all the support that they need for any harm that they've suffered. And you can do that, of course, locally.
And that's really reassuring, isn't it? So I mean, it's about the victim, not about where the offence took place. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask a few questions about the Article 51 Telecoms Law, which appears to be the only piece of legislation that we've got that is, you know, anywhere effective. Can you tell us how many investigations and prosecutions you had last year for the Article 51?
We didn't have the opportunity, to get
but
the data on that.
Too short notice because we've got a big written question this week in relation to data, haven't we?
Yeah, I think the analysts, but I can get that and send it to
That
you.
would be really helpful, because I think what we're after is how successful Article 51 is a device of bringing offenders to justice, really. So you might investigate quite a lot of Article 51, but how many actually get into court? That's what we're really
Okay.
after.
Yeah, I can get that data for you.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
There's also the sexual communication with a child legislation under the sexual offences law, which can be used as well. I don't think we'd mentioned that particular offence, so we've used that as well.
I think one thing that we're interested in is this kind of reasonable person clause in the Article 51, you know, what a reasonable person would consider to be offensive or menacing and the like. And I guess that particularly comes up with the social media element around Facebook and Twitter and the like. The other thing that we wanted to ask about was encryption and decentralised platforms and how Jersey manages to deal with the anonymity aspects of that. Yeah, how long have we got? Yeah.
Before you answer, can you actually sort of, when you say decentralised platforms, do you have an example of that?
Well, I mean,
What you're sort of...
Facebook is a decentralised platform, isn't it, really?
Okay.
It's something that we don't have control of within our own borders. We've also got, you know, decentralised finance, banks and things like that. They're all decentralised, aren't they? There's not one place. You can't go into the branch like you used to be able to, as it were. That's what I mean by that.
No, okay.
Sometimes that, because it's overseas jurisdictions, it is challenging to get data from those platforms. That's not to say it's impossible, but we often have to wait. You've got some stats for...
Well, one case I'm dealing with at the moment with Facebook, we've been waiting 18 months for data to come, and that's
to actually come back from Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that because, do you think they're just massively overwhelmed by requests and ours is in a queue?
Yeah.
So there's no suggestion that they're not taking it seriously in particular, it's just the sheer volume.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And again, it's a technical question, but I know the Connaught Harbour's mentioned the use of virtual private networks, VPNs. Is there any evidence that you've got children in Jersey using VPNs to circumnavigate the age restrictions, the age verification measures for gambling, for Facebook, etc.?
I don't think we've got any evidence of that.
No, but
No.
I would think it's highly likely.
Likely,
I mean, they're easily obtained, aren't they? VPNs.
Like a
Yeah.
few years back, you know, you need to have technological abilities to understand how to set up to start with. But now it's just offered as a service. Providers, you can just pay into it and it's automatically done for you. So you don't need that technical understanding to start with now.
To be able to operate.
You know, anybody can use a VPN to do anything.
And is there anything in the legislation forthcoming that's going to try and control that use of VPN for illicit purposes, or is it just a bit difficult?
So in the forthcoming legislation, the VUL task force didn't make any recommendations regarding the use of VPNs, so we haven't looked into it. I think we would if called upon to do so, but just on the face of it, I think we'd look for success in other jurisdictions in achieving that objective and see how they did it.
Yeah.
And off the top of my head, I'm not sure that there would be any examples to find.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Can I just ask, do you have like evidence of what people might be using VPNs for around any criminal activity? Or do you see that happening?
So when it comes to CSAM and indecent images, people will use VPNs to then mask their identity and mask their location. So whilst it might, you know, the VPN will say that they're in the United States, but they could actually be here in St Helier, we just wouldn't know. They could be anywhere in the world, and it will mask both their identity and their location. The providers of those are equally located often overseas and in countries where we probably wouldn't be able to serve any notice on them to then say, right, we have this information, they're using your service, can you then identify that person from that? We probably wouldn't get any success in any response from that.
So it's very hard to
Yeah.
try and work through that if they're using VPNs. Yeah. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so those questions will focus on children's rights. So, Minister, can you please describe how the development of justice policy and community safety policy is influenced and informed by the approach to children's rights and children's welfare?
The independent care inquiry highlighted that it was accepted by the states of Jersey in the closing submissions that the area of legislation and policy, there is still a significant amount of work that's required in relation to the welfare of looked after children. Subsequently, the Children and Young People Jersey Law 2022 was drafted and published. Learnings in relation to how the island can be more effective mechanism for developing legislation, policy and practice guidance for children and young people have been made. One such example is evidenced in the commissioning of a third party to review and develop a digital educational strategy for young people. Learning and recommendations from the care inquiry have also led to the establishment of, obviously, of the Office of the Children's Commissioner and the adoption of the Child's Right Impact Assessments in all projects. And this obviously contributes towards policy making, landscaping that is much more focused on the rights of the child. And certainly that's changed over the last couple of years, because when I first became States Member, we didn't have child rights impact assessments. Now they're compulsory. And obviously one of those examples is the Youth Justice Roadmap, which takes full account of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I don't know if there's anything further that, because obviously Alison knows a lot more about the sort of outcomes of the care inquiry probably than I do. I don't know if there's anything else in relation to that. Anything else you want to add, Nathan?
Well, on the legislative side, the Children's Commissioner has a statutory interest in legislation that affects the rights of children. But in fact, to my policy team, we have a very good relationship with the Commissioner, and we talk regularly, both within the sort of statutory framework we have to and outside, just more generally, to say, well, this is changing, that's changing. Talk about the child rights implication for these things. And very often they raise things we hadn't thought of. So it's an extremely useful relationship to have.
Would you say that the justice policy team benefits from any expertise ability to deal with those issues coming from just the justice team?
I'm trying to think of everybody's background. So actually there's some staff who've moved historically between the Commission's office and the Justice Policy team. It's just, a natural sort of career progression. So we have that sort of incumbent. We work next to and very closely with the Children's Policy team. We see them quite regularly, work in the same place. So there's lots of ideas and exchanged around that, and we see the Commissioner. So just to an extent it's internal and to an extent it's relationships.
Also, just so that you're aware, myself and the Children's Minister in particular have regular conversations with the Children's Commissioner. And so we work very closely in relation to all sorts of aspects involving children. And so when we make legislative changes or we're proposing legislative changes, we have conversations with her as well. Because obviously it is essential that we have a really good working relationship.
That's good. You have that relationship. What about, Minister, about the wider government? Have you got a coordinated approach with the wider government that focusing considering children's rights when bringing in policies?
I think that with the introduction of the career, I think that's really sort of taken it to that level. Because no legislation or policy can really be sort of looked at without the inclusion of looking at the career of the child. So I think, that element of it, I think seems to be working.
It's working for now. Okay, thank you. Which specific reference to the department's work on addressing digital harm can you describe how the rights and welfare of the children have been considered? Could you give us maybe an example of that, where the children's rights have been considered within your works department?
I think the Youth Justice Roadmap is the most recent example. So you've been presented on it privately a few times and it's imminently due for publication. There was a really detailed piece of work done there on child rights impact assessment to pull together all the previous research and engagement that had happened in that space and make sure that the document is focused throughout on child rights. And the original version had selected certain rights that fit with the outcomes, and actually following some feedback and discussion with the Children's Commissioner, it was seen to be actually all the rights are applicable throughout, and so we've changed the approach and the way it's presented. So that's probably the most recent example, but the career process, of course, makes sure that when policy is being developed, child rights are being taken into account, and I think that's quite well embedded now. I think the filter tool, it isn't called that, it's called something else. The initial triage tool that's done is really helpful for officers because it gives you that first view of whether you then need to do a full career or not. And that helps keep it proportionate for staff. Generally, most things we do would need to go to full career, and that's obviously what would be done.
Thank you. Minister, this is maybe about more your opinion. What measures should the government of Jersey be taking, if any at all, to protect children against online harm, the government as a whole? Would you feel it's done enough?
I think the government, I mean, it's not only the government, I think the island as a whole, quite frankly, but I think the government as a whole is
specifically as a government.
Have identified where we need to start looking. And so obviously there's legislation that needs to be up to speed, but also as well, I think from a government perspective, I think that the encouragement and the continual sort of media in relation to encouragement of young people to report matters so that they can be investigated. Because I think, from my point of view, I think quite often, if things are dealt with within the court processes, that encourages more people to come forward. And it's the same as the violence against women and girls. I think we've had significant increases, I think Alison would agree, in relation to people coming forward and reporting. If people see that something can be dealt with in the court processes or, or the things taken down, if people can see positive outcomes to them reporting things, that will encourage more to do that. So I think that's a train that the government as a whole needs to continue with, is to encourage people to report matters when they see them. Whatever those online harms are, they need to be reported so that those people can get the care and support that they need, but also that they can see the positive outcomes of them reporting those things. So that will encourage other public members to do the same. And that's not only children and young people, that is actually broad across the whole of the community, I would suggest.
So is it fair for me to say that presently you don't feel there is any specific measures that government of Jersey should looking and taking responsibility over, but it should be a continuous assessment of the situation?
I think the legislative changes are important, and I think it needs and the education, and as I've already said, needs to continue. But I think from a governmental point of view, I think it's continuing to do the work and to ensure that we keep the work up to speed.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. In 2017, the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry highlighted that Jersey had historically lagged behind other jurisdictions in updating child protection laws. How do we ensure that legislation to address online safety isn't similarly delayed?
I think we've already got a commitment to parts of the online safety, and that will be completed by the end of the year. I think it's important that, all other ministerial departments are doing the same things, that the legislation's brought forward as quickly as possible, because this type of legislation is important and should be a high priority.
Thank you. Okay. I think I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Do you want to?
Thank you. The wider culture, Minister, the panel has been contacted, obviously, by a number of parents who are concerned about the nature of social media use and addictive behaviours that might be related to it. What is your opinion about how that matter should be addressed?
As in the cultural thing? I think culture is always a difficult thing, I think, because obviously people, different people have different views. But from my perspective, I think we need to, as an island, be supportive of actually dealing with online abuse and online harm, like we would with any other offence, because these are criminal offences. So I think we should be supporting and changing our culture, as we did with domestic violence, as we did with other matters, the violence against women and girls. It's about changing culture and what is and isn't acceptable. And I think that is about, a lot of it is to do with education and actually making it quite clear to people what actually their online behaviour is or isn't acceptable. And it's almost an educational programme for us all, probably, to actually look at and encourage people to actually say that's not acceptable. And so I think the thing is, it's about encouraging people, whether that's a child or an adult, to actually, if they are subject to online abuse, to actually again reporting it to the police. And because then that way, those matters are dealt with, and the public then begin to see that the courts, the jurisdictions, the police don't think that this behaviour is acceptable. So to me, it's about all of us dealing with online social media to change the culture. So that's reporting for me, and being able to see those processes changing.
Thank you. Is protecting children from exposure to harm through this conduit of the internet or electronic devices, how different is it to protecting children from exposure to tobacco, alcohol, drugs?
That's an interesting question. I think it's a difficult question because, of course, if a child consumes alcohol, generally the parent can tell that the child's consumed alcohol. They probably can tell if they consume drugs. They can probably tell in relation to other things. I think online is a little bit more challenging because it's not necessarily seen, and the parent or guardian may very well not be in the same room as the child. And I think it is about just encouraging everybody to sort of ensure that they know as much as they possibly can what is going on in the lives of children. And that can be quite challenging sometimes. And I don't know whether Alison thinks, because obviously Alison's dealt with a lot more young people and children probably than me. I don't know if there's anything you could add to that, really.
I think a lot of what you're saying, and we've said before, a lot of this is going on in children's bedrooms and away from adults, and to buy alcohol, cigarettes, whatever it's out there. There's a human interaction that someone will see someone buying it, drinking it, etc. It's on the streets, isn't it? Whereas all of this is with the indoors in children's rooms, and it's difficult from that point of view to police.
It's basically to bring it all out in the open is the answer,
But
isn't it?
also makes the children so much more vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Because it takes place outside any adult supervision's eyes, and that's why they are so much more vulnerable
And that
to
is
the
why,
tools they are using, that they can cause them harm.
and that is why it's a job for us all. It's a job for us all as members of the community to try and deal with and prevent this as much as we possibly can. So all of us, for me, it's an island, it's a community thing. So it's about anyone that sees a change in a child, whether that's in school, in the home, in the youth centre. It's about picking up on changes in children and young people, isn't it? And it would be the same for an adult. You see a change in somebody, you think, what's going on? And I think that's about us all being aligned to what is going on in people's lives, in particular young people, and being able to sort of identify that and think there's something not quite right here. And it might be you or me might think there's something, and identifying that and maybe saying to somebody who's involved with that child, have you seen do you know what I mean? So I think it's about all of us as a community being able to help each other to identify the changes in young people in particular, to be able to help them to get over, to be able to deal with all of this.
So I think we've identified what an extremely different and challenging task this is. if it is a different type of harm, can you tell us about what the government has done so far, if anything, to assess that as a risk to all children?
I mean, I don't think we have in that sort of strategic overarching construct of identifying the societal risk, as the Minister says it's a community risk. I think it's a good point for us to reflect on.
Does the global reach of the internet change the parameters of risk? I mean, we've discussed it already across the table, but this panel hasn't made any bones about the fact that, we are concerned very much about this issue. And, we were anxious when the permissive extent clause wasn't extended. But, we are still of that opinion as a panel. I hope I'm not jumping ahead here, but we are always going to be worried about this issue. And do you feel that at the moment, the timelines, the Minister, you're happy with the timelines involved with bringing this legislation forward?
As I said, I can only answer in relation to my own timelines, and I'm satisfied that all of the elements of our legislation will be end of 2025. I think it would be inappropriate for me to be discussing other ministers' legislation, but I would encourage them to push as far as they can to get their legislation, because of course everything changes as of June next year. So I think that's what's important.
Yeah.
Okay. But as I said, I think it's a community issue, and as an island, we need to work together, all of us, to deal with it.
I've just got a couple of questions, and then I think we're just about done after that, aren't we? So we've already discussed the cross-ministerial group, and do you know what the terms of reference are for that group, and any plans that you can tell us about it?
I don't think they've been formally drawn up yet, but as part of what I was saying earlier in terms of the cross-government officer support to it, that will need to be put in place.
Okay, so will you be able to get that to us later then?
Yep.
And that's all sorted?
I'll need to find out the timescale of it, and then we'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. And then just sort of referring back to what you've been saying about how this is like a job for all of us to look at. My last question then is, should there be an island-wide strategy for protecting children from various forms of online harm?
I think with the work that sort of goes on with the corporate pairing, the safeguarding and all of the other things, I think it just maybe needs us to refocus and say, because I think we have actually got a sort of a strategy, but I think it's maybe sort of fragmented. Am I not right a little bit?
Disparate, sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's
I
just
think
about.
it's been done in bit parts, and the point of
It's more about coming together.
the point of the cross-ministerial group is to begin to galvanise that into a single approach. Whether that would be an island-wide strategy, I don't know.
No.
Ministers would need to consider carefully the right approach and sort of taking your recommendations into account. But I think it's clear, isn't it, that it's been done in component parts. So in some ways it has to be, and as the Minister and Nathan have stressed, that means the VOG recommendations, we can make progress on that part, and others are making progress on their parts. And the sort of ministers would have to consider is smaller gains in individual areas the right way to go, or is a bigger, broader strategy the right way to go? That would be a question for consideration in due course, I think.
Yeah, but from my perspective, I am totally committed to getting the violence against women and girls, as much of that, but all of that legislation done within the sort of pipeline. So it's done before.
So done before the next elections?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. No, that's good. And I think it's just coming up to 12:29 and we've just finished, actually, so...
Well done.
Yeah, perfect timing, really, isn't it? Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone.